As a new administration takes over the White House, what the whole world wants to know is whether or not America is heading in the right direction. Here to discuss policy and the future of the economy is Ron Paul, former congressman and host of the Liberty Report. Dr. Paul, welcome back to Kitco. Happy New Year.
Thank you. Real nice to be with you again.
I think before we start, first of all, how are you doing, sir? I think we would like to know that you're in good health.
I am doing quite well. I've gotten out this morning as usual and got my walk in 2 to 3 miles. So I do that routinely. No, I am doing quite well.
Oh, that's good to hear. Thank you. Now, let's start with policy. So Biden, on his first day, has already passed 10 executive orders, some of which have been reversals of what President Trump has done, including joining the Paris Accord. So what is the priority that America should have right now? And do you agree with some of these legislations and policies that Biden has proposed?
Well, of course, what I think and what I would promote is quite a bit different than the two major parties. Because, you know, when you look at the very big picture, the two parties aren't that far apart, even though there's a lot of pretense that there's a lot of competition there. But if you're thinking about a constitutional government, a free society, and Austrian economics, everything is different. So I would say long term, we're going in the wrong directions. All my life, the government keeps getting bigger and more violent, and we have these problems. And the things I don't like are endorsed by both parties, you know, whether it's deficits, the IRS, effort to collect taxes, the Federal Reserve, and these sorts of things. So they're there. But people will say, do you mean then that there's no difference between Trump and Biden? Well, obviously, there has to be some differences because Trump had some things he changed, and now Biden is anxiously changing them back. And they're all not in a neat category. Everything Trump did wasn't right or wrong. And unfortunately, I would have to say that if I was pinned down, that most of the time what the Democrats are proposing are more wrong than right. But there's a lot of activity going on there, and we're sorting it out. And that's what we do in our program, try to sort out what's happening. But quite frankly, spending is going to continue. I mean, look at what it did under the Trump administration, skyrocketing spending and deficits. And one thing, though, under Trump, maybe the big difference is that Trump did a good job on not raising taxes, and that's good. And he did reduce some regulations, and he did not start any major conflict around the world, although he wasn't quite with us as libertarians to have a non-interventionist foreign policy, because if that were the case, you know, our overseas presence would shrink, and people say, well, then we wouldn't be safe. We have to have our presence to be safe. No, I think we're safer if we just minded our own business. You know, us fighting those wars that have happened in my lifetime, anywhere from Korea to Vietnam, Middle East, all those wars, that didn't make us safer. It made us more vulnerable and certainly a lot poorer.
Yeah, you brought up spending, and I'd like to address that. Last year in 2020, we saw record amounts of stimulus and spending to alleviate some of the pain that Americans were seeing as a result of COVID. Now, unemployment, it still remains high. 900,000 was the latest reading for the unemployment jobless claims. And so with this high of a number, Dr. Paul, what is a policy that the government should take to bring this number down? Because clearly stimulus had limited effect.
Well, the proper policy is really tough under these circumstances, because the proper policy in a free market is just radically reduce the size and scope of government. But then you say, well, what would happen? Would the checks quit? Well, if you were going to do the right thing, they would have never been started, because you'd have to accept the principle that creating money and creating debt does not create more wealth. People think if they just print a lot of money and pass it out, the country will be wealthier. But I just think whether it's since the recession 10 years ago or what's gone on in this past year, people haven't gotten wealthier by governments just passing out more money. So to do that is politically not feasible because people would object because they'll point out, well, he saved this and saved that. But also what was created there was the debt went up, but we still dealing with thousands, if not tens of thousands of people out of work and little businesses that they don't look like they're, going to open up soon. So we have this combination, even before coronavirus hit. My turn was the inevitable downturn of the economy due to the outrageous spending and interference with interest rates by the Federal Reserve, and there has to be a correction. And it started to correct, and then the coronavirus hit, and everybody panicked. And I would say that one thing for sure is that President Trump was very, very effective in interfering and influencing the Federal Reserve. They all do it. Most of the time, it's a little bit behind the scenes and get the interest rates down a little bit. But no, President Trump was very, very adamant about it. And I'd have to concede, well, on the short run, it sort of helped some people. It certainly helped Wall Street. That's really how monetary policy is designed. They are the plunge protection team for Wall Street. Very, very effective. But the reason why you can't endorse it is just blowing the bubble bigger. And since the new money doesn't create wealth, there has to be an adjustment. The debt will be paid for. It's not going to be paid for by Americans working harder and sending more money to Washington and running the debt down. That's not going to happen. But real debt has to be liquidated in order to ever get back on our feet again, in a true sense of the word. And it gets liquidated by inflation. And that's what they're working on. And it to me amazes me that our government, especially the Federal Reserve, announces that the policy is deliberate devaluation of the money and sticking it to the poor people and anybody who suffers from prices going up. Oh, well, we have to get prices going up at 2% a year. Well, they achieved that, and I think it's a lot worse than that. And when it really hits, they'll have no control of it. See, that makes no sense whatsoever.
How do you think we'll be able to pay off our debt, both domestic and foreign debt to countries like China, for example? One of the things I've heard from economists is that the government wants inflation because that will just erode the value of the debt away. Do you agree with that?
That's the only choice they have. Our government is not going to stiff them. They're not going to go default. There'll be some of that in the free market. Some people will be denied, but take student loans. The students have been told that they're never going to have to pay. They're not, and they're backing off. Why pay it? Because we're going to get excused, especially under Biden. So that debt will, be liquidated in the sense that they won't owe it anymore. But since the government guaranteed it, it's going to add to the national debt. So the debt is going to be there. And the only way I see that this debt will be liquidated, which is absolutely necessary over a period of time to get the market working again in a true sense of the word, and that is going to be through liquidation of debt by inflation. They're working hard at it. And the tragedy is they're going to be successful about it. Every day I get another article of prices have gone up, steel prices have gone up, and they've never admitted to the prices that have gone up before. And this whole thing, if they don't restore sanity to the most important price in the whole economy, and that is the cost of borrowing. Interest rates. Interest rates are very, very important if you want to have any market economy. In a Soviet type system, they don't have a market rate of interest, and they also had no production, and the system had to collapse. But now we don't have that, and that's why I think the country is going to get much, much poorer, and we will have to someday go back to the idea that savings and market interest rates helps decide what consumers do, what investors do, what entrepreneurs do, and instead of having all this malinvestment. But right now we're under the gun. The debt has to be liquidated, but along with the debt, the malinvestment, all the mistakes made, the $6 trillion we just spent, bailing out people, that went and was a temporary reprieve. To me, that's like giving a patient a shot of morphine because they're addicted. And we're addicted to this type of economy, and that's why they can't stop, and that's why it's going to get much worse But we have a job, those of us who are in the business of spreading a message, as you are, to talk about sensible economics. And hopefully they'll come to their senses. I think the collapse will come. It's going to surprise everybody because I was really surprised what happened to the Soviet system. I was in the service in the 60s and watched the Cold War very closely. And then all of a sudden, boom, it disappeared. So let's hope and pray for our system to change as peaceful as that was.
Where were you when the Berlin Wall fell? What were you doing? Remember that day?
No, not as much. I would have been back in Congress at that time. That was 89, 90 is when the Berlin Wall went down. No, let's see. I got to get my dates in twice in the Congress. No, I was matter of fact back practicing medicine again, and I had my letter going, but I wasn't in Congress. But I remember that the other date that I remember very vividly is August 15th, 1971, and that is when the gold window was closed and wage and price was going on. The Bretton Woods system broke down. That is going to go down in history as probably one of the biggest monetary history days ever.
But you said you were surprised when the Soviet Union collapsed. I mean, what surprised you about that? It was a system that, according to your philosophy, was doomed to fail from the beginning.
That's right. That's right. I guess I should add to it that it broke down without a nuclear exchange or something, because the conditioning I had was it had to be violent. And what did the Soviets do over all those years? They suppressed any challenge at all, quite frequently with violence. They were a powerful dictatorship. So I assumed it would break down, just like I assumed that our system is not perpetually viable. We can't keep doing that, but I don't know exactly when it's going to happen. Nobody does, or exactly the consequences. But I also know that ideas are important, and understanding monetary policy and understanding why debt is bad, and trying to get people to understand and cherish and want to preserve liberty. And you can find most of your answers there in freedom of choice and voluntarism and private property. That's the message that has to be heard.
You brought up the fact that Americans are likely going to get poorer. It is kind of ironic, Dr. Paul, that whenever we do get poorer, the government tends to intervene more. But you're arguing that more intervention will just lead us to a cycle of becoming poorer. Is it not?
Oh, yeah. But all that money, the trillions of dollars that they passed out last year, a lot of those people, they were so far behind already. They caught up on their rents and things like this. So they're still poor, and more people are unemployed, since they were doing that. There was this up and down business, but the people are structurally unemployed, and the people aren't better off. And if you look at debt has exploded. And I think I've done a little booklet on bankruptcy, the financial part, but the moral bankruptcy too, I think is important because of the dependency people have thinking that government and politicians can take care of themselves. And that's the purpose of the political promises, Republicans and Democrats. And they have to outpromise each other. We're going to take care of you. It's going to be okay. But it isn't that easy. There's still some rules and laws in nature and economics that prevail, and that is that the work ethic is pretty important. There has to be production, and there has to be free choices. And one thing is you can't get a healthy, thriving economy sorted out if you don't have the price of money and the interest rates. That's an important price, probably the most important price that we can talk about.
What do you think of the concept of universal basic income? Would that alleviate some of the poverty that we have in the nation?
For a day or two, after a couple of checks. No, it'll make it much worse. They virtually do that now. In the old days, the subject of the minimum wage would come up, and there shouldn't be any rules like that. They should be able to make, when they put a wage and price controls on in 1971, they restrained the working people from getting their wages. No, it should be the market that decides that. But the market, the minimum wage, a guaranteed wage, can't work because you have to productivity in order to know whether they can get more money. But we in the old days would say, all right, the minimum wage is $3 and we want it to go to $4. And some of us would say, why not $8? Why not $10? Why not $15? And we were thinking nobody would ever conceive of that. So what are we going to do? It's up to $15. But it doesn't work that way. By the time it gets to 15, it's still $2.50 in purchasing power or whatever. You have to deal with purchasing power, not these nominal numbers that the politicians are attracted to. And a lot of people say, oh, $15 would be wonderful. It's not the answer. You have to have sound money, and you have to have free markets, and you have to have rewards for what people do, and you have to free market price of money and interest rate. Otherwise, you just build the bubbles bigger and bigger. And when the inevitable correction comes, it's going to be more violent than ever before. And I don't know. We're probably obviously getting closer every day, but as long as they can print money at the hour, I imagine we can limp along. But I don't think that we can reverse the big problem. The social problem is that the middle class and the poor are worse off, and the wealthy are getting much wealthier. There's no doubt about it. And that is just fodder for the socialists and the Marxists saying, look how horrible it is. And unfortunately, the people in charge don't argue the case, but that has nothing to do with the freedom. They argue the case, see, freedom doesn't work. And they use that to bash what we believe in. But that we don't have free markets. We have interventionism, and we have inflationism, and all these deficits and all this special interest going on. If we don't pin the blame on that, see, in the Depression, they were able to do it. They said we had that terrible depression because we had the gold standard, and we were, not interfering enough. And they said it lasted too long because the government didn't print enough money fast enough. But what they did was they got rid of the free market because they said the free market and the gold standard was the cause of it all. Right now, they're still saying, well, they're not saying the free market. They're saying the market we have now is at fault. And it is. It's at fault. But we never better sort out the definitions, because if people accept what we have as an expression of freedom of choice, property rights, and freedom to contract, we're in big trouble. So it's a word game. It's understanding words. It's understanding economics. I think we're in better shape than we were in that area than we have ever before, because there's a lot of people like your program you have right now. You talk a lot about freedom and sound money. So that's pretty good. And I think that, the Mises Institute and others teach Austrian economics, and that wasn't available. When I went to Congress first time in 1976, they thought, what are you doing? Why are you voting this way? They were dumbfounded, and they never heard of Austrian economics. But now people do know about it, and what we have to do is make sure that system of thought and that freedom serves the interests of the people, that they're better off that way. That's why people eventually get together and reject something like Soviet communism, because they weren't better off and they thought there was a way to be better off. That's why they rejected it.
You brought up the fact that the wealth gap in the U.S. is widening now. I remember watching some of Margaret Thatcher's older videos, and when she argued in Parliament in the UK that her policies were sound because although the wealth gap may widen, all people from the poor to the wealthy are better off, even though the wealth gap is wider. And if you actually aim to close the wealth gap, she argued at the time, everybody will be poor and worse off. Are you seeing that in the States? Are we seeing everybody better off, even though the wealth gap is wider?
Well, in a free market, the wealth gap shrinks. But you can't legislate it and say, well, your responsibility is to make everything equal. That would be horrible. But no, I think it's much better. I think when we had a freer market, we had the biggest middle class ever, and the poor are much wealthier. But I think that it's a source of a great deal of social friction right now, because I do believe that people really are suffering. And just the whole idea, I'm dumbfounded to think that we have tent cities and all the mess that's going on in our cities. These aren't people that are just a little bit poorer. There are people who are destitute, and they say, well, there's no inflation. Of course, there's a lot of inflation. Depends on whom you talk to. And inflation is there, and it hurts the poor people more than the rich people. And the figures that they pass out from the monetary authorities, it's never very bad. No, we're trying to get the inflation rate up to 2%. What if they measured inflation by the price of stocks and bonds? They're skyrocketing. What if they measured it by the stock of cryptocurrency? Maybe there's some inflation there for all we know. So no, the money goes somewhere, but it doesn't serve much purpose if it comes out of thin air. It has to come as a consequence of work.